15 years ago, living a normal life with my parents. Be 10 years old, only child in the family, happily going to school. Okay amount of friends, and nothing special. One day, I go to school. Class, this is new girl. She's gonna be your classmate. I look at her, and I notice something strange. One eye was a deep blue color, the other brown. I thought it was super cool. The girl was super shy. She just waved. Everyone was keen on getting to know her, and she seemed lost. Questions about everything. I was sitting in my desk, looking at her eyes. She seemed overwhelmed, pale, with black hair. The time of meeting everyone had passed. She would still be very quiet, almost never spoke to anyone. It seems like she just appears in class and then disappears afterwards. Even after all the questions, people really only knew her name and not much else. I spent my days in class looking at her and trying to get a good glance at her eyes, one blue and one brown. It didn't bother me too much, but as time passed, it became obvious the girl wasn't quite the normal type. 2 years have passed, tweeny hormones start to kick in, and I start to notice girls. Every girl in class was acting mature in front of the boys. Typical drama bullshit going on, girls yelling at boys for being dumb, boys not understanding shit and just doing their thing. Super bouncy active girls in class would get surrounded by some. We'd go outside and play games. Besides tag, along with age, came the game Spin the Bottle. All of these experiences, all of these girls actively looking to be grown up. Except one. Except that one girl that nobody notices anymore. That one girl who appears and disappears. She came a long way. In the 2 years, being a 10 or 11-year-old, I didn't care for her. Cool looking eyes, quiet girl, but all I cared about was games at the time. I started to notice more of her. I'd notice she wasn't in any of the games. No games were played with her involved in them, and I didn't know what I felt at the time, but I felt kind of empty. I'd have myself look at her in class even more often than usual. I'd notice her eyes. They were even more beautiful. After all, we were all growing up at that time. She'd always sit by her window, looking at her book, writing in her book or doodling. The same book every day for the past 2 years. I noticed it before, but didn't quite manage to catch on to the fact. Doodling and then looking at the window, outside into the playground with the trees. I felt like she was sketching something that requires so much precision and skill that it was barely even possible to do. She'd look outside, and then at her book, and carefully, stroke by stroke, would write something down. One day, someone had enough of her mysterious girl act. That was the ace of the class. That one guy who could say anything, and people would just not care for it that much. Hey girl, why the hell are you always sitting here with your book and not out there playing with us? Do you not like us or something? She notably started to shiver. For a few seconds she did that. She looked at him with her eyes and just closed the book. Closed? Slammed it, more like. Put it in her backpack and ran out of the class. People just shrugged it off, and I didn't know what was wrong either. The act, if it was an act, was very well done. I felt attracted to her. However, that didn't stop me from having an active social life. I would still continue playing outside. The girl would still sit in the window doodling. Childish curiosity kicks in. I wonder what she's got in that book. I wonder where she lives. I wonder. School ends, and everybody runs out of class. Girl slowly gets her stuff and puts it into the bag. I try to keep my own pace as slow as possible, just to leave as soon as she does. I follow her out of the school and into the street. She looks around and then crosses. I can't just follow her, that'd be creepy. Hey, wait up! She looks back at me with her beautiful eyes and stops on the other side of the road where I catch up. I run up to her. Hey, what's up? Nothing. Nothing's up, of course. I asked her if she was okay if we went home together. Her home was on the complete opposite side of the city to mine, but I didn't care. Nice weather, huh? I was the chitty chatty guy in the situation. Looking back at it, it was silly. A silent, weird girl and that one ordinary kid who won't shut up. We walked. We walked for almost an hour, so it seemed. I stopped talking for quite a while now, and we were still just walking. It felt like she was relieved that I wasn't even talking. I took that into account, so I just kept on walking. Then I realized I wanted to know something about her, about her book, about that one book she's had for the past 2 years. Hey, so what's up with that book you have every day in class? She looks at me, probably the first time during that whole trip to her house. None of your business. Those are the 4 words she told me, besides nothing that whole trip. Boyish cockiness kicked in. Why are you being like this? Just show me what you got. I started to get physical, and I touched her bag. As soon as I did that, she hit me as hard as she could and started running. I was sitting there with my face sore. I felt weird and kind of angry. I turned around and went home. It was not after 3 more years that I had anything personal with her. I would still notice her in class, every day in class for 3 years. Her beautiful eyes, her developing body, and 3 years later, we had to switch schools. I get into a school not so far away from this one, and she does too. The odd girl was in my class, never loud and never childish. It made me think, and made me want to change myself. I stumbled upon her on the first day of school. She noticed me too, and instantly looked away. Meet and greet period of the school starts, and everyone is getting to know each other. The douchebags stick out, and the more average people stay, well, average. Our class was Douchebag City, USA. The guys here were probably the cuntiest cunts in the world. They would pick on everyone, and I wasn't left unpicked on. Stupid shit we got picked on for. Of course, I instantly thought of the girl. That girl was the most silent, conserved person I knew, and she still had that book. Until today, she still has that very book in her hands. Yo, what the fuck's up with this book, you weirdo? That's when the alpha kid would just go all out on that poor, odd girl. Your mom fucked a monkey or something? Why are your eyes so weird? Why are you so weird? What's this book for? She tried to ignore it until one of the kids took her book. She was obviously helpless. Much tougher bullies were holding onto the book, holding it above her head, throwing it around. She couldn't get to it, and I couldn't watch it. I stood up. Hey, give it back. What's wrong with you? He throws the book back and comes up to me with a few of his friends. What'd you say? It was break, and no teachers were around. He hits me in the face, and all of them start grouping up on me and start kicking me. A teacher comes in and gets everybody off of me. The girl was looking around. I only noticed after I got up. A broken rib, all that I got after that. The bullies got expelled from school for a few weeks, and I had to sit in the hospital for a few weeks also. I was thinking about what happened. Some friends would come to see me. Friends, family, the usual stuff. The visits stopped after a bit. Only my mom would bring me food and told me to get better soon. I would lay there for hours and days. Until, Anon, you have a visitor. She came in. She came in with her little bag and her beautiful eyes. She came in and sat on the chair next to my bed. I didn't say anything. I knew how she was about speaking. You really didn't have to do that, you know. That was dumb, Anon. I smiled and looked at her. She was looking at her bag placed on her lap. She looked at me. She saw my smile and smiled herself. I never saw it before, but it was beautiful. Thank you, Anon. She stood up and left. I got back into school almost same day as the bullies got back. The bullies were forced to change classes, all into different ones. The girl would be noticeably more into me. I'd catch her looking at me in class. Her doodling wasn't as frequent anymore. And I never knew what was in that book of hers, but whatever it was, it had to be very important to her. I realized that this was another chance with her, to really get to know her. I came up to her during break. Hey, are you busy after classes? She froze for a second and looked at me. She smiled and said, No, why? Well, I thought maybe we could go out. She looked at me and then back down to her book. Sure, Anon, why not? She never spoke to me before, really. During the period of 5 years, I've only heard her say a few words that were not forced out of her mouth. We went out of the school to the nearest park. It was winter, so it was already pretty dark at 4 p.m. We walked for a few moments, silent completely. Learning from my mistakes, I knew I couldn't be too aggressive with this girl. I didn't know what to talk to her about. All I knew was that she had a book and 2 different colored eyes. We walked into the park. It wasn't very cold, so I offered to sit on a bench. We sat down, and we were quiet for a few moments. It was pretty awkward, but I didn't expect much else. Surprisingly enough, though, she broke the silence. What you did means more than you think. Thank you, Anon. I told her not to mention it. I told her anyone in the right mind would have done the same thing. I was white knighting all over the place. As I passively bragged about my bravery, she sat there in silence. She looked at me and smiled, and then she leaned in and hugged me. A hug that didn't feel like any other girl I'd ever hugged. She held me tight in her hands, and she held me for a good minute or so. I was just sitting there like an idiot. She stopped hugging me. I want to go home. Want me to come too? No, but here's my phone number. That's the time I started to actually get to know her. I'd see her in class. Still, I felt happy having a connection with her. I felt like it was needed. I felt like I was someone she needed in her life. As a 15-year-old, I felt great. One day, I asked her to go out after school again. She agreed. However, this time we went for her home instantly. We were walking to her house, around a 40-minute walk from school to her home. She lived in a flat, and I came in. It was a warm and cozy, well-kept place. So, your parents at work? Mistake. I live alone. Oh. We sit in her room. It was clear she wasn't living alone. There were more pairs of shoes which definitely didn't fit her. I decided to ask again, about the book. She looked at me. Why does everyone ask that? Curiosity, purely. This book was given to me by my grandma. She passed away when I was 8. It's basically a precious gift from someone close. But why was it so precious? I sat there, considering whether or not it was a good idea to ask that. But why is it so precious? Was it a book or was it a journal? Was it empty space to be filled with thoughts and drawings, or was it something else entirely? She sighed. I know she never really wanted to tell what was in that book. She pulled out the book out of her bag and looked at me. Put the book in the drawer. I don't think that has to do with anything. It's nothing special, it's just drawings. I believed her, but then again, I didn't have a choice. She was open to me. I was probably the only person she was open to throughout her time at school. Suddenly, I heard a door unlock. Very clumsily, someone walks into the flat. The girl is clearly in panic. Her eyes are wide open and she's breathing heavily. "Quick, you have to hide, please." She hides me under the bed and enters the beast of a person that we would all probably expect. It was 5 p.m. or so. Completely drunk, the person walks up to the girl. "Hey, darling, how's your day been?" She's silent. I knew she had to have been. It was a woman. I saw her only barely from underneath the bed. The woman stood there silently for a few seconds. Then I heard a hit. "Look at me when I'm talking to you!" Silence continues. That's a good girl. The woman leaves the room. Then, as soon as she leaves, she yells out, "We're moving soon! Can't afford this shithole!" My heart stopped for a moment. The girl threw herself on the bed and started crying. I was still under the bed. The door closed, and I got up. "Girl, there's nothing I can do, Anon. It's okay. You can go." A fire escape is conveniently placed next to her window. It was the way out for me. I left her home. I've seen her for another week, and then she disappeared. She disappeared for 4 more years. That's about the time I started university. I left the city completely. I still hadn't forgot about the girl, but I wasn't a desperate guy. I moved on a bit. I've had a few affairs during that time. However, I never truly forgot about her. I always thought where she could have gone, where she could be. I knew she left the city because of her aunt or mother or whoever it was. I had my own apartment, a part-time job, and a tuition to pay. Life was going smoothly. University parties, students' life made me forget about her almost completely. However, it wasn't what happened. One night, sleeping after a long day of work and studying, someone knocks on my door. I ignore it because I couldn't be fucked to wake up. After a few moments, the knocking intensifies. I get up and open the door. I see her, in a hoodie and old pants, all broken and, to say the least, stinky. I let her in. She has her bag with that book. I let her feel like she was at home. Obviously, I was surprised. She was shivering. I offered her a hot bath and a place to sleep. She didn't explain much. If anything, she didn't actually say much at all. She was just sitting there, looking at her bag with her book. She accepted my offer to clean up. I was sitting there, utterly confused. I saw the book out of the bag, and it was all torn up. Half of the pages were completely torn out and just stuffed into the bag. Probably something to do with whatever relative or something, I assumed. She finished up cleaning and literally collapsed on the floor. I had no other choice but to get her into a bed and let her sleep. She must have been absolutely exhausted. I didn't know what she had experienced or what she had suffered. I decided not to think about it too much and get some sleep myself. I sleep until noon. I wake up and smell food in the house. I walk outside of my room and I see her cooking. She looks at me, her eyes round and happy. She runs up to me all childlike with her hands behind her back. "Good morning. Want something to eat?" I was surprised by her activeness, to say the least. Sure. We ate in silence. I obviously asked her what happened to her over these years. Family business. She smiled, but that smile faded quickly. She looked back at her bag with the book, and I didn't bother to ask what exactly was going on. I stood up, and then she quickly stood up too, pushed me back down on my chair. "It's okay, I'll clean this up." I just wanted to go to the toilet, but I agreed to wait up a bit. I knew she needed this. I let her live in my flat for as long as she needs. One night, while watching TV, I couldn't help but ask, "So what's up with you and that woman?" I figure out that the woman was her aunt. She would beat her since she was a little kid. Wounds were all over her body, but nowhere to be shown in public without getting undressed. She talked about it so calmly, in her soothing voice, with her blue and brown eyes looking to her lap. She felt so cold while talking about that situation. I didn't want to bother her about it anymore. We started to live life like roommates, more or less. While living with her, I'd learned that she was one of the warmest people I knew. She was nice and calm. She was clean and tidy. However, one day she leaves at night, like she sometimes does. I don't know what she did outside at night, but she did something. However, she didn't end up coming back in the morning. I felt worried. She didn't come back until the evening, and for another day. I didn't know where she was. Her phone was left at home, so no way to contact her cell. I was thinking about calling the police, but I didn't even know her last name, and neither did I have her number. However, I knew where she lived for the 4 years. I knew where her aunt lived. I knew where she lived and what she suffered while living there. I was afraid of the worst. I got in my car and started driving. I drove for about 3 hours. I stopped at the home in which the girl supposedly lived. I opened the door to the house. It wasn't even locked. Stench was immense, and I started walking down the hallway. I smelled rot. I came into the living area, and I noticed a girl crawling up in the corner, sobbed and crying. I didn't know what was going on. I ran up to her, and then I looked in the kitchen area. The main stench was coming from there. Alcohol, rot, and dirt. I walk into the kitchen and see the woman hanged up. She hung herself. No way the girl could have done this. I repeated that to myself so many times in my head. I almost vomit from the smell and from the fact that there is a dead person right in front of me. I went back to the living area, the girl now standing with tears in her eyes. I start walking slowly towards her, and then she wipes away her tears. She runs at me and kisses me. Probably the most amazing kiss I'd ever have. Ironically, in a house with a rotting dead body in it. You're my everything, Anon. Let's run away from here. I didn't even think. I just followed that suggestion. We got back into my car, and we left the house. I looked at her hands. She had a few pages from her book or journal in her hands, clearly written words and some drawings. We get back home. We sat on my couch, and I didn't know what to do. I don't think she knew what she was doing either. I can't be here anymore, Anon. I can't live in this place anymore. I sat in silence. I didn't want to believe what I saw in that house was something she had done. We were sitting, and I've decided to get back into my old rhythm of life, forget about everything. But that wasn't her plan. She didn't want to live here anymore. She didn't want to see this place anymore. Anon, it's hard for me to ask you this, but explains to me that she wants to go away and asks for money. I didn't want her to leave, but I felt like I loved her. I agreed to help her leave wherever she wanted. I gave her as much cash as I could give her for her needs. It wasn't much. She packed up some of her clothes and a book into her bag. We stand there for a bit once she's done. I'll never forget you, Anon. Okay? Don't forget me. She kissed me. We kissed, and we stood like that for a few moments, and then she leaned back and said, "Goodbye, Anon," and left. I haven't seen her for the past 6 years or so. I haven't moved on. I can't think anymore. I don't know where she is, and I don't know what she's doing, but I hope that she comes back the same way she came back to my house, and I can see her again. You can call me a beta or whatever the fuck you want. All I can tell you is, I have no idea what to do. Still.